Today, two nuclear-armed superpowers are locked in this really intense high-altitude standoff, right?
Yeah.
And the weapons of choice, well, they aren't just missiles or tanks anymore.
No, not at all.
Yeah, I mean, the modern front line is defined by, like, wrapped barbed wire, specialized flat-bottomed boats, year-round concrete tunnels, and perhaps most surprisingly, to me anyway, pharmaceutical supply chain.
Right, pharmaceutical supply chains. It is, it's a profound shift from how we traditionally view warfare and, international relations.
Definitely.
When we examine the geopolitical landscape of the Himalayas today, we are basically looking at a slow-motion collision of two massive civilizational plates, and they're constantly searching for an advantage.
Yeah, well, welcome to today's deep dive. We are tracking the really dramatic evolution of India-China relations, specifically focusing on the decades following the year 1962. We really want to answer this central question. How did two ancient civilizations, transition from the highly idealistic era of Hindi Chini Pai Vai, which was the 1950s slogan basically declaring Indians and Chinese as brothers, to today's volatile state of, well, competitive coexistence?
Yeah, it's a huge pivot. And to understand the headlines we see today, we really have to map out a historical cycle that has repeated itself over decades.
Okay, let's unpack this. What are we looking at in the source material?
So the material we are analyzing today lays out a distinct recurring pattern, right? It goes diplomatic engagement, followed by border tension, which then escalates into a military response and ultimately forces a return to negotiation.
Right. And just real quick before we jump in, we should note that when we discuss the political motivations of various leaders today, we are impartially unpacking the strategic models and, the geopolitical calculus presented in this analysis.
Exactly.
We're not endorsing any specific political ideology or taking sides here, left or right, just laying out the facts from the source.
Precisely. We're just looking at the strategic framework.
Right. So let's establish our baseline. The year 1962, it's widely considered a Himalayan blunder, right?
Yes, that's the term often used.
It was this brief, brutal border war that completely shattered India's post-independence idealism. But that trauma acted as a really harsh catalyst, didn't it?
It did. It forced an intense awareness of the border and birthed a core analytical model that basically dictates national security to this day.
And that model is, well, it's simple but profound. It goes like this. Experience leads to capability building.
Right.
Capability building generates confidence, and confidence ultimately results in deterrence.
Exactly. The experience of 1962, it revealed catastrophic gaps in defense preparedness.
Oh, yeah.
The assumption back then was that two developing post-colonial nations would naturally align simply because they shared, anti-imperialist histories.
Right, the whole brothers concept.
Yeah, but that was violently disproven. So to see how that capability building actually played out, we have to look at a major stress test that happened just 5 years later in 1967.
And interestingly, the initial flashpoint wasn't even on a freezing glacier, right?
Bro, it wasn't?
It was inside an embassy.
Yes, the diplomatic crisis of June 1967.
Right. This is an incredibly intense piece of history. China expelled two Indian diplomats from Peking, accusing them of espionage. But they took it a step further.
They laid siege to the entire Indian embassy compound.
Which is wild. You have Red Guards basically trapping the diplomatic staff and their families inside, essentially cutting off a sovereign outpost.
And in international relations, how a nation responds to a siege of its embassy, well, it dictates its global standing.
Right, you can't just send a strongly worded letter.
No, India did not just issue a formal protest. They executed reciprocal action against the Chinese embassy in New Delhi.
Wow. What did they do?
They restricted the movements of Chinese staff, and this continued until the pressure forced Beijing to blink.
So they essentially mirrored the siege.
Pretty much. They lifted the siege in Peking and allowed the Chinese secretary to leave New Delhi safely.
See, the underlying lesson there is that managing an assertive neighbor requires an incredibly delicate balance between restraint and absolute firmness.
Exactly. You have to prove you are willing to escalate symmetrically.
Symmetrically, right. But that diplomatic firmness was about to face a much more lethal test just a few months later at a high-altitude pass called Nathula.
Yeah, September 1967. Major General Sagat Singh, who was commanding the 17th Mountain Division, recognized a critical vulnerability.
Okay, so what was the move?
Well, to prevent ongoing disputes, he ordered the physical marking of the watershed, the geographical ridgeline, as the official boundary.
Literally putting down a physical line.
Exactly. Troops from the two grenadiers were sent to literally string wire and mark the line.
And then, on the morning of September 11th, Chinese forces opened up heavy fire on those unsuspecting Indian soldiers.
using mortars, recoilless guns, and artillery.
It was a severe escalation. I mean, it resulted in significant Indian casualties, including the commanding officer taking a bullet to the head.
But the response is where we really see the evolutionary leap from 1962.
Right, because in 1962, the foundation just crumbled under pressure. It's like a boxer getting knocked down in round one.
That's a great analogy.
But coming into round two in 1967, they have a completely different guard and a devastating counterpunch.
What's fascinating here is that India did not fold or retreat into a defensive crouch like before.
So what did they do?
The Indian artillery observation posts, which were located at Sabula, had clear lines of sight. They opened up a devastating pinpoint barrage on Chinese targets down in the Yathong Valley.
Oh, wow.
By the time the exchange ended, the Chinese suffered an estimated 340 dead and over 450 wounded.
That is a massive counterpunch.
Yeah. A few days later, China actually handed over the bodies of fallen Indian soldiers, citing the desire to preserve Sino-Indian friendship.
Really, that's quite a shift in tone.
Which demonstrates the outcome of our core model, right? Capability building led to a confident, prepared response, which established real deterrence.
And did this specific show of firepower actually change the diplomatic dynamic long term?
It did. The Chinese respected that display of resolve. I mean, the most striking physical evidence of this is that the fencing Indian troops erected at Natula during that conflict, it still exists today.
Wait, really? The same fencing?
The same fencing. Assertive posturing was effectively neutralized by sheer, uncompromising strength.
Okay, so because that baseline of deterrence was firmly established, the relationship enters this fascinating new phase. We move into the era of border management.
Exactly. The dynamic shifted from outright war to aggressively testing boundaries while actively managing the fallout.
And a prime example of this is the 1987 Sumdorong-Chu incident, right, over the Tawang sector.
Yes. During Sumdorong-Chu, Chinese forces intruded into the area and occupied a feature called Wandong.
But the response was different this time.
Huge departure from past hesitation. The Indian Army executed Operation Falcon. They airlifted a brigade to forward positions, rapidly mobilized sizable forces to surround the intruders, and strategically shifted troops to other volatile areas, like North Sikkim.
Okay, I want to focus on the mechanics of that response for a second.
Sure.
By airlifting troops and immediately matching the adversary's presence, India didn't just hold ground, right? They created an active counter-threat.
That's exactly right.
They forced a tactical stalemate.
Right.
It proves that rapid force mobilization doesn't necessarily start a war.
No, it actually forces a pause. It creates a mandatory window for diplomatic resolution.
And that window basically became the defining feature of the 1990s.
Right, because both India and China were standing on the precipice of massive economic transformation at that time.
Yeah, you cannot lift hundreds of millions of people out of poverty, attract global foreign investment, and modernize your infrastructure if international headlines constantly feature, artillery duels on your borders.
Exactly. Capital requires stability.
So that mutual, really desperate need for economic growth led directly to the landmark Peace and Confidence Building Agreements of 1993, 1996, and 2005.
Yes. They implemented protocols on troop deployments, restricted the use of firearms near the line of actual control, and established communication mechanisms.
They essentially put the border dispute in a freezer so both economies could heat up.
That's a great way to put it. But, you cannot freeze a border forever when the geography itself holds immense strategic value.
Right.
Which brings us fast forward to the 2017 Doklam standoff.
Doklam. That's a highly sensitive plateau at the trijunction of India, China, and Bhutan, right?
Yes. China attempted to unilaterally alter the status quo by extending a road southward into Bhutanese territory.
And to understand why a single dirt road triggered an international crisis, you really have to look at the map.
You do?
Doklam overlooks the Chumbi Valley, and that valley acts like a geographical dagger pointing directly at India's Siliguri corridor.
The Siliguri corridor, often called the Chicken's Neck.
Right. It's this incredibly narrow strip of land that connects the rest of India to its northeastern states.
If China completes a road through Doklam, they gain a rapid deployment route that directly threatens to sever India's connection to its own territory in the event of a wider conflict.
So it was an existential logistical threat.
Exactly. So in response, Indian troops crossed into Doklam to physically halt the road construction, acting on their security agreements with Bhutan.
I remember reading they physically formed a human chain to block the earth-moving equipment.
They did. It was a 73-day standoff, that was eventually resolved through mutual disengagement.
But the underlying mechanism here is crucial for you, the listener, to grasp. All those peace agreements from the 1990s, they only held weight because they were backed by constant physical vigilance.
And military readiness at places like Doklam.
Right. A diplomatic treaty is essentially a piece of paper, unless it is underwritten by the military capacity and the political will to enforce it.
Absolutely. The agreements functioned as a pressure valve, but they required constant daily maintenance.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, which brings us to the violently ruptured pressure valve of 2020.
Yes.
If there was an established framework of peace agreements and decades of successfully managing face-offs without firing a single shot, why did the relationship devolve into a brutal hand-to-hand clash in the Galwan Valley?
58 years after the 1962 war.
Exactly. Why then?
To dissect Galwan, we have to layer physical geography over the domestic political climate.
Okay, let's start with geography.
Geographically, the Galwan River Valley sits in the subsector north of Ladakh. It is a harsh, unforgiving terrain that provides direct access to the Chinese-controlled region of Aksai Chin.
And the catalyst there was infrastructure, right?
Largely, yes. In the years leading up to 2020, India aggressively developed its border logistics, specifically constructing the 255-kilometer Darbuk-Shaikh-DBO road.
The DSDBO road.
Right. It's a massive engineering feat running parallel to the line of actual control, connecting Leh to Dalat Beg Oldi, which is an advanced landing ground in the north.
So the completion of that road fundamentally altered the tactical balance. It allowed India to rapidly deploy troops and heavy equipment to the Depsang Plains and the Galwan Valley.
And for the Chinese leadership, this wasn't just a local upgrade.
No.
Galwan provides depth to China's National Highway G219. That's the crucial artery connecting Xinjiang and Tibet.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So Indian mechanized forces operating fluidly so close to that highway presented an unacceptable logistical threat to China's internal connectivity.
So China junks the border treaties, and that results in a sudden, massive troop buildup and a brutal clash involving improvised melee weapons.
Because firearms were still technically restricted by those older treaties.
Right, and 20 Indian soldiers died, along with an undisclosed number of Chinese casualties. But, the geographical threat to a highway only tells half the story.
Yes. The geopolitical analysis points to a striking historical parallel between 1962 and 2020 regarding domestic politics.
So what does this all mean? Is border aggression sometimes less about claiming rocks and rivers and more about a leader projecting strength back home?
Well, political scientists often analyze foreign aggression through the lens of domestic vulnerability.
Okay, how so?
If we look at the strategic calculus in 1962, Mao Zedong was navigating the catastrophic fallout of his Great Leap Forward policies.
Right, severe economic mismanagement.
Resulting in a famine that caused an estimated 35 to 45 million Chinese deaths. His leadership was under immense internal pressure.
So a massive domestic disaster threatens regime survival.
Exactly. So the theory goes, you manufacture or escalate an external conflict to unify the nation and the armed forces behind the leadership.
And India's forward troop movements at the time provided the necessary pretext.
Right. Now apply that same analytical framework to early 2020.
Xi Jinping.
Yes. He was facing unprecedented domestic and global pressure.
Let me guess, the economy.
The Chinese economy contracted by 6.8% in the first quarter of 2020. That was the first such contraction in decades. Plus, there was the massive global fallout and internal anger regarding the origins and early mismanagement of COVID-19.
Right, and didn't they also have the protests in Hong Kong?
Yes, highly visible, sustained pro-democracy protests.
So the analysis suggests that when a leadership structure faces severe internal questioning, an external enemy on the Himalayan border becomes a very convenient unifier.
It is a widely studied concept in international relations known as diversionary war theory.
Diversionary war theory.
The physical border basically becomes a theatrical stage for domestic political survival.
That makes a lot of sense. So with the treaties effectively broken post-Galwan, the battlefield itself has evolved again because traditional warfare is expensive, it's risky, and it's highly visible. So how do these two nations compete today?
Through an infrastructure race.
Exactly. They are engaged in a massive, high-speed infrastructure race. Concrete and logistics are the new artillery.
Infrastructure is the physical manifestation of deterrence now. To counter China's decades-long buildup, India has accelerated its border development at a completely unprecedented rate.
And a crown jewel of this effort is the Atal Tunnel. inaugurated in 2020.
The engineering alone is staggering. It's a 9.02-kilometer highway tunnel built at an altitude of over 10,000 feet.
Connecting Manali to the Lahaul-Spiti Valley.
Right. Before this tunnel, the entire region and its forward military posts were completely cut off from the rest of the country for nearly 6 months every year due to heavy snowfall.
6 months.
Yeah. Now, it is a year-round, high-speed logistics artery.
And alongside the Atal Tunnel, there's the rapid construction of dozens of high-capacity bridges, new tunnels, and upgraded air bases across Arunachal Pradesh.
They have even procured specialized equipment like the 17 flat-bottomed quick reaction team boats.
The QRT.
Yeah, the QRTs, specifically designed for rapid troop deployment across the freezing waters of Pangong Seo Lake in Ladakh.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the equation is simple. Infrastructure creates operational options.
It really does.
Having a million-man army is completely irrelevant if they're stuck behind a snowed-in mountain pass.
Precisely. Roads and tunnels dictate the speed of mobilization, and in modern conflict, speed is power.
If you can position a brigade faster than your adversary can spot them on satellite, you control the diplomatic outcome.
But, physical infrastructure is only one domain of modern competition.
True.
The rivalry extends heavily into diplomacy and global partnerships.
Right, because recognizing that managing a rising superpower cannot be done in isolation, India has leaned heavily into external balancing.
You see this in the aggressive strengthening of strategic alliances. India is a core member of the Quad, alongside the United States, Japan, and Australia.
Which is designed specifically to ensure a free and open Indo-Pacific and counter unilateral dominance.
They are also deepening defense ties with ASEAN nations and demanding diplomatic reciprocity.
Yeah, as the late Indian External Affairs Minister Sushma Swaraj bluntly put it, if China expects India to respect a one China policy, then China must equally respect a one India policy.
That diplomatic assertiveness is crucial, but it brings us to a terrifying vulnerability.
The economic side.
Yes. Military strength and global alliances can be entirely neutralized by economic dependence.
Just imagine pouring billions into Mountain Strike Corps, fifth-generation fighter jets, and nuclear submarines, only to realize your domestic healthcare system is entirely dependent on the adversary you are preparing to fight.
And that is the reality. The analysis highlights that India still relies on China for approximately 70% of its active pharmaceutical ingredients, or APIs.
70%. For you listening, APIs are the foundational raw chemicals required to manufacture basic everyday medicines.
From paracetamol to vital antibiotics.
Right. So if a border skirmish escalates into a wider conflict, the most devastating weapon wouldn't necessarily be a hypersonic missile.
No, it would be an export ban on the chemical precursors needed to treat sick and injured citizens.
It is a staggering realization that completely redefines national security. Economic vulnerability completely undermines military capability.
Which leads us to the ultimate framework for survival in the 21st century, the era of measuring a nation's strength solely by counting its tanks and troops. That's over.
Today, strategy is dictated by comprehensive national power.
Let's break down that equation for everyone.
Okay. Comprehensive national power equals military capability plus economic resilience plus diplomatic influence plus technological edge plus information advantage.
Right. You cannot compensate for a 0 in one category with a high score in another.
So true.
If you have the best mountain infantry in the world, but your adversary can shut down your banking sector with a cyber attack or withhold your medicine, your national power is fundamentally compromised.
Economic power, i.e. strategic power.
It requires a holistic, all-of-government approach to security. The supply chain is as critical as the front line.
So let's synthesize this evolutionary timeline we've just tracked for you. We began with the naive, post-colonial idealism of the 1950s.
That illusion was violently shattered by the trauma of 1962, forcing a massive strategic reassessment.
And that trauma drove capability building, which proved its worth during the fierce artillery response at Natula in 1967.
The psychological shift was complete. Deterrence was established.
Then, realizing the immense cost of constant conflict and driven by the need for massive economic growth, the 1990s became the era of border management and peace agreements.
But those agreements were only as effective as the military readiness backing them up.
Right, which we saw tested and proven through swift force mobilizations at Sumdrong-Chu and the physical blocking of infrastructure at Doklam.
Until the immense domestic pressures and shifting strategic calculations of 2020 pushed the relationship back into violence in the Galwan Valley.
The treaties were sidelined. and the relationship transformed into an era of multi-domain competitive coexistence, a conflict fought with concrete tunnels, global alliances, and pharmaceutical supply chains.
The evolution from 1962 to today is, well, it's a masterclass in how nations adapt, survive, and project power in an increasingly interconnected world.
Which leaves us with a final, lingering thought for you to mull over. As this concept of comprehensive national power takes over, we are seeing conflicts actively move into new arenas.
Absolutely.
Nations are building the capacity to sever undersea data cables, paralyze power grids through cyber warfare, and weaponize global trade routes.
Right.
So if the next war can be effectively won by crashing a financial system or starving a supply chain, do the rugged physical borders of the Himalayas eventually become a mere sideshow?
That's a profound question.
Are we intensely focused on the geopolitical fault line we can see while entirely missing the invisible structural shifts happening right beneath our feet?
Definitely something to think about.
Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.